Hey guys, welcome back. So far if we look into the diagram, let me open the diagram. We have covered this area. So we have a class for base specification. We now know how to handle request body. We now know how to request response. We have an occasion class for handling API endpoint, which we will optimize later. But we are yet to do anything about handling of assertions for responses and for handling of assertion of the response body itself. And in this video, we are going to start working on this particular area, right? So if I open Aqua, um, before I start working on the actual code, let's see what are the kind of things that we would need to assert. So for example, status code is something that we know is something that irrespective of what kind of API endpoint we are dealing with, it could be a booking endpoint or a customer's endpoint, hotel endpoint, address endpoint, whatever. Status code is something that we know we would like to assert for all different kind of endpoints. So that's one thing. For example, things like asserting uh, JSON schema is something. If you want to check for a particular thing in the whole response, let's say for an ID, that is something again which could be common across APIs. And then we would have something which is very specific for each API endpoint. So for example, booking response. So let me open this split right. So for example, if you want to create a booking, the kind of response that you will get would be completely different than, let's say, if you want to create a let's say a customer, right? Or if you want to create an address. So then we would also need clauses which can specifically assert only the the response body, so that instead of trying to instead of us trying to like duplicate all that information in different tests like what we're doing here, if we could have just one class which handles the uh, assertion of the whole body, right? So with this argument, it seems like we would at least need one class which will just do basic assertions, and we would need a couple of classes depending on each API endpoint to assert the full response. In future, I will also show how we can do this more efficiently. But for now, with this concept, let's just create a package. And I think the best place to create a package for assertions is not in source, but it's inside, not in source main, but it's inside test folder. And the reason is assertions are more closer towards test, so they should also be placed in the test package. So let's create a package called assert. Um, package assert, invalid package name. It's impossible to create a Java class inside. Let's call it asserts, right? So this would be our package name. And what I want to do is, instead of relying on JUnit, we would start using assert_j. Now assert_j is a library which was introduced to me by one of my friends. Assert_j allows us to write fluent assertions. So let's say if I just look for uh, assert_j, we can get the home page of assert_j. You can read all about it, like what it does, how it works. But for now, what we're interested in is assert_j Maven dependency. So let's go to Maven repository, assert_j core, and the latest one is from Jan 16, 2023. So this looks pretty good. Let's click on this and let's copy this. So it's copied, Windows 2. Let's go to our POM file and let's add this after JUnit, right? The scope could be test, which is completely fine. Let me load dependencies, because we don't want to use assert_j in the source repository. If it changes in the future, we will remove the scope from test. And let's copy this and let's add the version here. So assert_j core, and the version is 3.24.2. Let's put it here, and if I do a dollar assert J code version, we have everything in place, at least from a dependency perspective, right? So inside the asserts package, what I'm going to do is for generic assertions, I will create a class called new verify response, because essentially we are interested in only verifying response. So verify response, and in this response class, I at least want to have two fields. One is of type response, response, private response field response. Then another field that I want to have is something called soft assertions, which comes from assert J, right? And soft assertions. And the idea is that we will capture the response from the calling method, and then we will do some soft assertions on it, and in the end we will do all the assertions together. And basically what we're going to do here is, in this particular class, we will have a static method, public static, and this method would basically accept the response from the calling class, and it will initialize the response fields for this particular class. So if I say it as public static assert response, and it will accept a response, and of course it needs to return something. It is going to return the type as the object of this class, right? Instance of this particular class. And what this will do is it will return new verify response, and it will take this as an input, right? Now expected 0 arguments but found 1. Let's create a constructor. So now we have created a constructor which accepts response, and what we will do with this constructor is we will say this dot response is equals to response. So whenever this constructor is called, we want to initialize this response field with whatever response is coming from the calling method. And let's also initialize soft asserts as new soft assertions, right? So whenever this constructor is called, now we have initialized both both the response and the assertions, and we don't want anyone to call this method directly, so we want assert response as the entry point to call any of these methods in the class. So let's make it private for now, right? And with this, for now, I think we can just add one method, and that one method would be let's call it as public verify response. In fact, public verify response, and we could say status assert response, status code, and we could say status code is an int, and let's say status code, right? And now we can use assert J assertions. We can say assertions, and then we could say assert that, and then we can take response get status code, and once we get the response status code, we can first add as a description. So we could say described as status code, exactly the same word as above, and then we could say it is equal to, and whatever the status code is provided, right? So when we do that, it will basically assert this particular response status code, right? And we can return this at this moment. So this will allow us to write fluent methods. When we return this, we can have multiple methods here, and it will allow us to assert all of them together. So at this moment I will not add any more methods, but I will just add one more method, and that would be that would return void, and I would say assert all. And basically what you want to do with this method is, whenever this particular method is being called, we want our soft assertions to be called. Let's see. By the way, so status code is something that we really want to assert in a hard manner, that if you don't get the expected response code, there is no point asserting anything else, right? And that is the reason why I used hard assertions here and not, for example, soft assertions. If instead, if we were trying to, let's say, verify for a content, so let's say if I create another method, and if I say public verify response, and if it contains let's say a certain value, and if I name the value as let's say string, and let's call it as value, then we don't want to do an hard assert, right? Maybe there are many more methods that we want to assert independent of each other if the response code is as what we expect. So in this particular case, rather than doing assertions.assert that, what you can do is you can use soft assertions.assert that, and then you can change the so we're not getting response.get status code. Let's first get response.get body, and get body. In fact, we can get it as the string, right? And once we get the whole body as string, then we can say described as response body, and then we could say check if this contains for example this value or not. So in this particular case, what will happen is if we call both these methods, if the response code itself is incorrect, it will not run this method. But if the response code is correct, and if there are many more if there are many more methods which are doing soft assertions, soft assertions or assert all will basically assert all of those methods. So with this method, let's say if I go and if I try to replace the first assertion, so rather than doing assert equals, if I say verify response, assert response, and let's pass response, and now if I say status code is, and then instead of like even giving 200, so if I call it as sc, okay, if I do an alt enter, status code is okay, and let's say if I also want to assert let's say contains value, and I don't know, let's see. So for now, for example, we are always giving the additional needs as breakfast, right? So if I give additional needs as breakfast, and then if I give assert all, we are able to assert both for the status code and also for this particular value, right? Let's run the test and see how it goes. Test. Okay, the test is passed. We don't see any issues. So this seems to have worked well, right? One more thing which I want to show is all these methods return this. So you can do method chaining, but the last method that we use is assert all. It returns void, and that means once you call assert all, you cannot call any other method after this. Let's do a control alt L to format the code, and now we can get rid of this particular 200 statement, right? Verify response. So it's not really sounding too smooth. Verify response, assert response, maybe let's call it as verify response assert that response status code is. So let me change this method to assert that. So let's call it as assert uh, that. And now if we read the test again, verify response, assert that response status code is this, contains value, assert all. It sounds much more fluent, right? So let's copy this and let's change all the methods. So response status code, it does not contain any value now, and we will say sc underscore created, right? It should be okay, but we know that we have a bug in delete endpoint. Let's go assert. So we're saying status code is okay, and we're saying it should contain, for example, so I'm not checking specifically for first name. That is something that we will check later. But for now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to check for the value somewhere, right? So that is what I'm doing. Let's do the same thing here. Control Z, Control C, Control V. Status code is okay, and I'm checking for the name, that somewhere the name should contain, the name should be in the body, right? Not a perfect test, but this is just the first iteration. We will iterate on it and we'll make it better. What about here? Response, we'll do the same thing. Control C, and we're going to assert the response code contains value, for example, and you can call this method again, right? If you also want to check the last name. So I will get rid of this, and I will also get rid of this because now I'm not using it anywhere. So our test is becoming much more readable already, even though we're not even doing full body assertion, right? But it's still something. So now if I run the whole test, let's see if it works fine or not. Okay, so all the test works perfectly fine. We can remove this unused import, and let's see, let's have a quick look. Yep, so this is looking pretty good. And in the next video, what we will do is we will try to create a specific class which will assert the body, like the actual body of this particular response, and not just say that, hey, if the value is somewhere, it's fine. What if the value was not in first name, but it came in the last name? That would be a bug, right? So in the next video, we will do assertion on the response body, and yeah, we'll take it from there. See you. Cheers. Bye bye.